Okay, so the dictionary definition of soup is that it's a liquid food made by boiling meat, fish, or vegetables. Now, lettuce is a vegetable, right? And lettuce is basically just leaves. So from that, we can then infer that tea leaves are also just leaves. So then tea leaves are a vegetable. So therefore, making a hot cup of tea, you're also basically making soup at that point. At the very least, you're making a broth, which then by extension, if you are taking some like beef bones or whatever, and you're boiling that in water to make a broth, you're making soup, but you are also then making beef tea. So wouldn't that mean then that if the water is hot enough, isn't bath water basically just human tea? What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Sounds Good Makes Sense, a discussion show for the World of Warcraft player. My name is Devilor. I've got a really interesting topic that I'm excited to dig into today, talking about the concept of what does it mean when we say things like saving players from themselves, and how much is this really on the designer versus on the player. But before we get into that, I want to remind you of a couple things and point a couple things out. The biggest one being that the War Within beta has just started. I'm going to be streaming a whole bunch of that over on my Twitch channel. That's twitch.tv/Devilor. And the reason that I want to call that out in this video specifically, aside from the fact that you should watch my Twitch stream, it's great. I'm pretty entertaining sometimes, most of the time, some of the time, a little bit of the time. I'm fairly entertaining over on my Twitch stream. But the other reason that I wanted to call it out is that I'm going to be hopefully doing some dungeons with viewers. I want to do as much as possible, try to get through all it, because I haven't had a chance to do like any of the dungeons yet in the War Within Alpha. And now that the floodgates are much more open, I'm hoping to be able to do some fun stuff with viewers. We can do some dungeon runs, we can do some delves, we can do all sorts of stuff that becomes available at that point. So head on over to my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Devilor. I am still planning to start streaming to YouTube again at some point. It's just probably going to be on a different channel because a bunch of people pointed out that it spams your subscriptions, which is super annoying. I don't want to do that to anyone who doesn't want that. So anyway, twitch.tv/Devilor. Hopefully everything will be working. As of today, like right as I'm recording this, dungeons are basically just broken. You kind of just can't really do them. Hopefully that all gets fixed so that way we can actually go and do some dungeons, do some group content, do some fun stuff in the War Within beta. If we don't do it this week, we'll do it next week. We'll probably continue doing that for a while. It's probably going to be a fairly regular thing for the remainder of the beta. So please do check that out. Head on over there. I would love to see you. Anyway, getting into today's topic, something that came up in Search of Answers this week. I was digging into the concept of timed content as far as like content with a timer attached to it, and specifically talking about Mythic Plus. And I had mentioned that there's a reason for the timer being there for Mythic Plus, essentially as being there to save players from themselves. Now, a lot of people pointed out that the Dragonflight timers aren't nearly as strict as they used to be. In fact, that was something that I didn't know because, like, okay, I've done some high level keys, but those were basically, to say that I've done those keys is a bit of a stretch. Really, my primary contribution to those keys was making sure that the floor stayed down. That was pretty much all I was doing throughout those keys. I haven't really done too much that really focused on how difficult the timer was, so I apologize for not really catching that in my explanation on In Search of Answers. But the important thing about that, and what I thought was really cool about the way that people were describing this to me now, is that pretty much nails exactly where I think the Mythic Plus timer for those dungeons actually is perfect. The timer isn't there to be the challenge. It's not a speed run. It's not something that you're trying to get through as fast as possible anymore. At least that's what I'm told and what it sounds like is the case. And honestly, from the little bits and pieces that I remember from my viewpoint directly looking up at everything on the ground during the Mythic Plus that I did the previous season, that seemed to be kind of the case. The timer wasn't actually that incredibly strict, and that's good. That means that the timer isn't there to be the challenge. The timer is there to make sure that you don't end up just completely grinding your face against a challenge that you're not prepared for. And when I said that in Search of Answers, that sparked a bit of discussion. When you say things like that, people tend to respond to that with, there's a lot of people who will respond to that with something like, well, if the player's doing something stupid, that's on them. Like it's the player's fault for doing something dumb that they hate. I'll note that usually when people say this, it's because there's some safeguard that they want removed, and they assume that it's there because someone else is going to do something dumb. There's questions to ask about whether or not you're actually the one that's going to do something dumb in that situation, but I'll leave that to you guys to decide. Either way, the point isn't wrong. Like, it's not directly the game designer's fault if players are doing something stupid that they haven't been directly told, hey, go do this stupid thing. Like if the game isn't actively telling you go and grind your face against the wall for ages, then it's not really the game designer's fault that that occurs. But it's also kind of missing the point. Like when people like me say things like that, when people who have worked in the games industry say things like saving players from yourself, what we're usually talking about when we say that is preventing a situation in which you're going to do something. Like we know you're going to do this because there's a reason for you to do this. There is a benefit for you to do this. And you're going to be miserable the entire time. You're going to absolutely hate it and you're not going to have fun. But because there is some reason to do it, you'll still do it anyway. And I want to be super clear, there are examples of this sort of design philosophy in basically every single video game. Like pretty much every game that's ever been created, there is some sort of mechanic or some sort of system or whatever that is put into place to prevent players from doing something that will either ruin the game or just really be not fun for them to do. It's just there to stop you from going down some path or finding some sort of like quote unquote optimization that just makes everything not fun. Here's another example from a different video game. I've been playing this game called Soul Mask a lot lately. Which, by the way, if you haven't checked it out, if you're into survival crafters, highly recommend that you check out Soul Mask. It's actually like shockingly good. I was very surprised by how much I enjoyed it. Disclaimer, they sent me a key for it, so I didn't pay for it myself. It's like 25 bucks, 26 bucks, something like that on Steam right now. It's not super expensive either way. But I was very surprised by how much I actually liked it. I expected it to be one that I was like, this is kind of interesting. I'll poke at it a little bit. And I've actually been really getting into it. I've been really enjoying it. But getting back to the point, the reason that I bring up Soul Mask is because it has a system in it that you've seen it in a lot of different video games. WoW has a version of this as well, where there are consumables you can use that give you buffs, but you have a limited number of those consumables you can have available, and you can only have one of a certain type at any time. So, for example, in Soul Mask, there is food that gives you an HP buff. There's food that gives you a stamina buff. And there's a couple of other buff foods that you can get. But the food and stamina ones are kind of the most important in terms of like difficulty and combat in the game. At least the parts of it that I've experienced so far. Now, they could balance the game around you having literally every single food buff, right? Like they could balance the game to where each different one of these things that you eat, they all stack and you can just keep getting more and more and more and more hit points. And you end up with like a ton of HP. Or they balance everything to where, okay, all of these now only give you a little bit of HP, but you still need to like cram all of this stuff in your mouth. But that would not be very fun. Like it would not be very entertaining to be like, all right, time to go fight a boss. I'm going to eat the entire world. Incidentally, games used to let you do that. In fact, classic WoW is quite notorious for the fact that if you want to do like level 60 rating and you want to like super parse for things, you need to go get your tubers. You need to go get like there's so many different buffs and stuff that you can get that the game will just let you use all of these. And game design over the last couple of decades has been heavily moving away from that because game designers realize like this is just giving people a lot of busy work that isn't fun. But importantly, you can't just balance the game to have a less of a requirement for these things and leave it at that. Because then players, like they can still go and get all this stuff. If they were still able to stack all of these buffs, then they would just be grossly overpowered and they would trivialize the game's content and then they would not have fun as a result. So either way you look at it, either as a, we don't want to have to go and get all this stuff because that's not fun, or a, we can go and get all this stuff, but it's going to make the game not fun. Either way, the result is that the game is less fun. And that's kind of the core of the point. And something like buff limits, that's a really, really basic and obvious example, but I'm more just trying to get across the point that the reason that you need to quote unquote save players from themselves from time to time isn't so much about like hand holding them and making sure that they can never make any mistakes whatsoever. All of these games still allow you to make mistakes. There's still ways in which you can do dumb things. It's more about making sure that there isn't a benefit to doing so. It's making sure there isn't an incentive to go and do something that isn't fun or is going to make the game less fun. And whether or not players gain something, whether or not there's an incentive to it, that's a pretty loose definition. Like games are subjective and they're all stuff that it's just for fun anyway, and fun is subjective. So what someone wants to do and what someone feels like is something that they're going to benefit from can be all over the place. Plunderstorm is a great recent example. This is something where the only rewards from Plunderstorm, like the only stuff you got for it, was purely cosmetic. But there were a lot of people who, like, the game was clearly not for them. Like, Plunderstorm was not their cup of tea whatsoever. They really, really hated playing Plunderstorm. but they really wanted those rewards. They really wanted those pirate themed cosmetics. And the only way to get these rewards, at least as far as we know, was to do Plunderstorm. So that left these players in a position of, do you either say, well, I guess I just won't get those, which that kind of sucks. That's not a great result. If it's something cool and you would like to have it, then sure, like why it's purely cosmetic. Like why would you not want to go and get that? Unless, of course, like the game mode is just super not fun. So for those people who just didn't enjoy Plunderstorm, and again, I'm saying all this from the perspective of someone who really did like Plunderstorm, so I just wanted that to be clear again in the process of this. But anyway, I'm rambling. If you wanted those rewards, but you didn't like Plunderstorm, your choice was either don't get the rewards or struggle through something that you're not having fun with. And the end result was a lot of those players just chose to have a miserable time. And they went into it knowing they were going to have a miserable time. They went into it knowing I'm not going to have fun. I'm just doing this because I want that thing. But they had a miserable time as a result. And this is the core of why this concept is so important for game design, is that people don't really make games because they don't want you to have fun. Like the point of making a video game is that designers want you to enjoy playing the game. And quick aside, every time I say that, somebody somewhere pops up and goes, oh, but what about this one stupid change? If they want us to have fun, why do they keep making these dumb changes? They make changes that you don't like, usually for some other reason that maybe you're not thinking of, or maybe you don't care about personally, and that's fine. But they're not making those changes because they want you to not have fun. They're making those changes either because they feel it's necessary for some reason, for somebody else to have more fun. They feel it's going to make the game more fun overall, which oftentimes, yes, they can be wrong about that, which the third point is that maybe they were just wrong. Maybe they made a mistake. Game designers are people, and they can sometimes think something's going to be great, and it turns out to not. No one is making a video game, except maybe Bennett Foddy. No one is making a video game that they want you to not enjoy. Even in like the most like corporate, cooked together, made by the finance department, like most incredibly predatory monetization sorts of games that exist out there, they still want you to enjoy the game enough to keep playing it so that you will hopefully spend money on it. They don't want you, they're not going to make a game and cram it full of all these different monetization options and make this super predatory, awful video game and just be like, haha, excellent, mission accomplished. Our game's not fun and no one wants to play it, because then they don't get their money. What that means is, as much as possible, game designers want to, at the very least, try to avoid situations where it's going to incentivize you to do something that you're not going to have fun with. Now, hugely important note, that is not easy. It is very, very difficult, especially in a game like the larger the game gets and the more moving pieces there are and the more different ways that players can interact with your game, the harder and harder and harder it gets to just completely avoid all situations in which there's just something that isn't fun. Like sometimes it's just straight up unavoidable. Sometimes a designer will be looking at something and say, yeah, this isn't great, but I don't have a better solution for this problem. So I guess this is kind of what I'm going to end up doing. And sometimes, and this is in my mind, one of the core reasons behind the timers for Mythic Plus, sometimes they just have to decide like, yeah, we're going to just take the inelegant solution because there isn't an elegant one. Having those timers in place in Mythic Plus, yes, it puts some extra pressure on the group to try and go fast. Yes, it probably subconsciously encourages people to treat it like a race, even when it isn't. Yes, there's probably cases in which the timers have been too strict. There's definitely been cases in the past where the timers have been too strict. I can't speak to Dragonflight for reasons we've discovered or discussed already. But yes, there's probably all number of issues that could be brought up and discussed about specifically the case of Mythic Plus timers in Dragonflight and in prior expansions as well. But it does solve the problem of what happens if players just keep trying and keep trying and keep trying until they hate themselves and the video game. Like it, at the very least, gives that clean cutoff point of, yeah, you've been in here for too long and you need to stop. Go do something else. And specifically for Mythic Plus timers, it's also important to remember, like, these are intended to be like short time commitment things. These are not supposed to be something that you're spending hours in. So even if you are okay with spending hours in one of these things, like there's 4 other people in the group, and especially because they want this to be something that you can just find people and you can, you know, use the group finder, go and pug them as much as you want, etc. At least at the low to mid difficulty levels. Like, it needs to be something that there is a guarantee this will not take longer than X time. So I really do think the Mythic Plus timers, they need to be there. They're not like, again, they're not the most elegant solution. They're not perfect, but it's better than a lot of the alternatives. Anyway, hopefully that explained where that line of thinking comes from a little bit more, kind of a more philosophical topic today than really directly discussing anything. Obviously, we're talking about Mythic Plus timers a little bit, but it's more of a philosophical thought. Like, what is the concept and the reason behind trying to prevent players from doing something dumb by implementing some sort of mechanic to actually prevent that, versus just saying, yep, the players did something stupid, that's their fault, not mine. Like, no, it's still, even if it is the player's fault, it's still important for the designer to try to find ways to encourage them to not do that. Anyway, that's all I got to say on that particular topic. Thank you so much for watching. I want to give another shout out to my patrons. Thank you so much for all of the support. It really does mean an absolute ton. And helps me continue keeping these series going. If you are interested in checking out my Patreon, it's at patreon.com/Devilor. I've got some interesting new things in the pipe for Patreon that I am hoping to be able to put into a more solid sense relatively soon. I may end up just doing a separate, like, little short video here on the channel that talks about what the current benefits for being a patron are, because it's been a little while since I did one of those. And I've been talking to patrons about it, but I just now realized, literally in the middle of recording this, that I have not talked that much outside of the private Patreon areas about exactly what I'm doing for those things. So probably end up putting together some short little video about that sometime soon. I've got some cool ideas coming for that. Also, quick reminder that my merch shop has launched. If you want to get a hat that's as cool as this one, and it's a very cool hat. This is my favorite hat. I love this hat so much. You can head over to devilor.com. Shop's right there. And reminder that both patrons and Twitch subscribers can get a 15% off discount on everything that they purchase. Excuse me, everything that they purchase on the store. Wow, that burp just came out of nowhere. I apologize. Holy crap. Anyway, yeah, I think on that disgusting note, we're going to call that the end of the episode. Thanks again so much, everybody. I'll see you later.